Hello. So this is going to be a performance review of Aaron Sorkin's play Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, which, as you might very cunningly work out, is an adaptation of Harper Lee's novel To Kill a Mockingbird. This was presented by the Rochester Broadway Theatre League here in Rochester, New York, where I'm currently filming from, at my mom's house. The big draw of this performance was the star, Richard Thomas, who played John Boy Walton on the Waltons. Big deal back in the day. Big TV show, majorly important. And it's interesting, anecdotally, because a lot of the people who seemed to be at today's production were older people. And I went with my mom and her friend. I don't know. I know my mom grew up watching the Waltons, and I suspect many of the people in the theater tonight did as well. So Richard Thomas, again, is a big draw. He's a big star, regardless of whether you grew up with the Waltons or not. But I think that's a thing that a lot of people would sort of be able to relate to. A lot of older people who grew up with the Waltons as a major part of their cultural consciousness. That being said, so Richard Thomas was really good. Everybody in the production was really, really good. There is one critique I have, and I'll get to that. But for my money, Jacqueline Williams really stole the show. Jacqueline Williams. This is the cast picture. That's right. Jacqueline Williams played Calpurnia, the housemaid, nanny, chum of the Finch family. So she seems to be a maid. She seems to have a role as the nurse and sort of governess almost for especially Scout, but for Jem Finch as well. And then she's Atticus's friend. She stole the show. Jacqueline Williams consistently got audible reactions from the audience. And there was a lot of moments where other people got audible reactions as well. Melanie Moore, who played Scout Finch. That's Melanie Moore. That's Richard Thomas, by the way. Melanie Moore frequently got applause and things like this when she made these sort of evocative, particularly anti-racist statements. And then throughout, there was humor. And I'm going to talk more about the humor of this performance. But the humor consistently got laughs. So this was a very engaged crowd, which from an actor's perspective is really, really good. I don't know if this was more engaged than they're used to for this production, less engaged than they're used to for this production, but I thought it was a pretty well-engaged crowd. But nobody got the reactions that Jacqueline Williams got. And part of this is that she was a recognizable figure. The sassy black maid that we get going back to things like Gone with the Wind, for instance. The woman who speaks the truth and does so unflinchingly from the perspective, what Gayatri Spivak would call the subaltern position, basically from the position of sort of least social prestige, least social security, as somebody who is both African American and female in a racially hierarchized and patriarchal society. To be a Black woman who speaks the truth to white men is dangerous, and so it requires a great degree of courage, a great degree of insight, and a great degree of wit. And Williams brought all of those things. She was a supporting role, but really, really good in not only the way that she presented the character, but the way that she evoked responses from the audience. And I think part of that might be the particular cultural moment that we happen to be in, because one of the things that has become increasingly clear to many people over the past 8 years or so, 10 years maybe, through the Black Lives Matter movement and through a lot of analysis of the 2020 election, the 2022 midterms, even going back to the 2016 election, is that African American women consistently have been leaders in resisting the U.S. movement toward fascism. So, I'm getting a little bit political here, but that is, I think, appropriate for a production like To Kill a Mockingbird. It's been a minute since I read the novel. I think I read the novel probably 7 years ago now. So it's been a bit since I've read the novel. But based on what I remember, it seems like they hit all of the major points from the book. And it is basically an anti-racist work. There's some controversy over it, some of which is, I think, justified, but a lot of which I think is not necessarily justified. A lot of it deals with problems with the way that race relations are represented, but not necessarily inaccurately for 1930s Alabama. So the play, I think, does a really good job giving us basically all of the plot elements of the novel. There's some peripheral stuff, like Jem and Scout, I think, go and stay with their aunt or something for a bit, and it doesn't really feel like an important part of the novel, but it's part of the overall build-up of the story in Lee's fiction. It's not really necessary for the play, because the play reorders the event. Sorkin puts the events in different order, actually kind of starting us with the end point, because Scout and Jem and their friend Dill Harris, who incidentally, Dill Harris, played by Stephen Lee Johnson, right there. Another really amazing performance. I actually think Johnson was another fantastic actor. Everybody was good, but I think disproportionate to the centrality of his role. Johnson was really, really good. Again, Williams, the same kind of thing, disproportionate to how central the role was in the story itself. Just extraordinarily successful actors in these positions. But Scout, Jem, and Dill actually start with the question of how how Bob Ewell could have fallen on his own knife, which is really the concluding events of the novel. But I think this is an interesting choice that Sorkin has made, because when you're adapting a piece like To Kill a Mockingbird for American audiences, you can probably make a reasonable assumption that many people in that audience will know that story and will know that plot line. Even if they don't know it backwards and forwards, you can usually count on people to have some sense of it. And so, beginning with that question that really drives the end of the novel actually works quite well to sort of evoke this audience reaction, audience awareness of this piece. And this is one of the things, incidentally, that we consider in adaptation studies, is what our audience is going to make of the ways in which they recognize or sometimes fail to recognize what's going on with an adaptation, as a reworking of an earlier text. So starting that way, I think, makes really a lot of sense. And then the bits and pieces of the trial are broken up with the rest of the storyline. The friendship between Scout and Jem and Dill is developed. Atticus Finch's sort of ethos, his ethics, his lawyerliness is developed, etc., etc. So you have a structure that really, really works for the stage while preserving the narrative flow of Lee's novel without being just a sort of straightforward repetition of Lee's novel. So, I said I had a I said I had a critique of this. This is the last thing I think I'm going to talk about. I said I had a critique of this, and I do. It's that I don't think many of the accents were good. This is Alabama, the 1930s. They did have a dialect coach, Broadway dialect coach, somebody whose job it is to get the accents where they needed to be. No shade for this person. Personally, I do not like accents on the stage. I may have said this before in previous performance reviews. I think the deep South accents that they went with, for many of the actors, to me, did not quite sound convincing. There were just bits and pieces that, at least to my ear, did not sound right. There were things that were definitely right. Like at one point, I very distinctly noticed that Bob Ewell, the villain, of course, the white supremacist, says white rather than white. So I have the sort of what's considered kind of a neutral American accent for the most part, which is the sort of belt of Pennsylvania, Western New York through Ohio. That's by linguists considered to be one of the most neutral American accents. So when I say white, some people will argue that there is a tiny inflection in front of the W sound, but it's really, really minimal. But this is an interesting thing about dialects, particularly Southern dialects in the U.S. One of the markers of whiteness in the South, particularly post-Civil War, became dialect, and the way that certain words were pronounced. White was one of the biggest ones. You had a lot of Southern politicians, in particular, who got very fond of the phrase, like white on rice. And the reason they got fond of that is because it gave them an excuse to say the word white, and to say it in that way. And that was a sort of coded racial marker for their proper Southern whiteness. This is a thing, I actually learned this, what's his name? I will remember his name later. He's the primary linguistics guy at West Virginia University, and this is I went to one of his talks, and this is one of the things that he talked about was the way that this particular sound in this particular word was used to codify one's proper Southern white credentials. And so to hear Bob Ewell say white very distinctly, spot on for what you wanted to do. That being said, a lot of the other accents, a lot of the other words, to me, did not sound right. They didn't ring true. And so, again, I don't like accents being put on for productions. I think it's generally a bad approach. Obviously, there's disagreement about that because a lot of productions do it, and a lot of people clearly think it works. Again, my personal opinion is that I'm not a fan of it, and so that's my one gripe. And again, it's more of a personal preference thing than it is, here's an actual failing of the production itself.